Well, we're continuing our discussion now. I think we're going to be talking about this for some time to come, of what's been going on here in the Isle of Man. The tribunal, of course, with the doctor, came to a conclusion. We had the whole waiting on, wondering what's going to happen in Tynwald on Tuesday with the Chief Minister. But Chris Thomas is with us, and even before what happened in Tynwald, let's go back on the case. Mm-hmm. You've made it quite clear you think there should be some responsibility taken, and you said in another interview. Should we deal with that? You want to see some heads roll?
Not for the sake of heads roll, but for the good of Manx politics. What I basically said on Sunday on the radio was that I think another MHK put this even better. It would be like an anchor dragging the continuance of the David Ashford in the role of Minister of Treasury would be like an anchor dragging along the ocean floor, and the focus would be on whether or not Minister Ashford should have resigned if he chooses not to resign. And what we need to focus on is fixing healthcare, and indeed dealing with the process of whistleblowing as soon as possible, and most importantly, ending once and for all a culture, even a tradition I've called it, of unfairness at work, bullying at work, which is not only in the health service, it seems also to be in the bus service at the moment. I know some scientists who've had issues with their employment in the Department of Environment, Food and Agriculture, and it seems to be prevalent across many parts of the public service. And all those issues need to be fixed, and they're all bigger than just one person. And it's not heads to roll for the sake of heads to roll, but Minister Ashford respects himself. I'm sure he will be reading the Nolan Principles about showing the behaviours in yourself that you want to see in others, and about being truthful and about being fair and impartial when you make decisions. And I think the tribunal evidence, and we'll come to that about sub judice, is that he didn't actually have the quite as good a time 2020-21 as it first seemed. He's brilliant. Minister Ashford talked with you regularly and explained things in a clear way, medical information, medical opinion. He took difficult questions and answered them really well. He's a really good MHK. I'm not arguing that he's not a good MHK, but ultimately Minister Ashford, it seems, chose to distance himself deliberately from some of the expert opinion, and he was criticised for that in the tribunal.
Well, you on this interview said he's very Walter Mitty, which is that's quite something to say. Well, I mean, if people explain that, they believe themselves to such a degree their universe revolves around themselves.
I was trying to think of a parallel in history, and in a way, I came up with President Nixon, and that's a bit of a that's flattering.
You mean after Watergate?
After Watergate,
how that dragged on.
In other words, the most important thing was there was the potential for not only Watergate to be a break-in, but to be a massive cover-up. Okay, and Kissinger apparently used to talk about Nixon having Walter Mitty tendencies, and eventually Nixon went on television and resigned because it was for the good of the nation, it wasn't for himself. And what I also said in the interview was the last person I can think of making a really honourable resignation was John Shimon. And there are differences with the situation, but John Shimon resigned.
But he said he would fall on the sword if he was found.
Exactly that. He did say he would resign if what he had done was unlawful. David Ashford's never done that, so there are differences. Sure. But essentially, that was really honourable, and within a year, I can't remember exactly how long, Minister Shimon was back. John Shimon came back as another minister, and I said at the time that he'd gone up in my estimation hugely, and he was now the best Chief Minister candidate, or at least a better Chief Minister candidate than was before, because he behaved honourably. And I said the same thing about David Ashford at the weekend. Okay. He's a fine person. He's a great politician in many ways. We've all got strengths and weaknesses. One of his weaknesses is he's got to put the national interest first, and it is I hope that he has a heart-to-heart chat with the Chief Minister, and they work out something for the good of the nation.
Therefore, you were surprised that he didn't resign on Tuesday or the Monday. On Monday, we had a scalp, didn't we? We had the top man in the civil service go down. You were expecting him to go then at that stage?
Obviously, he's retired early, apparently, but.
Well, that's just, you can read it any way you want. I mean, people will make their own assumptions over that particular thing.
I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to knock individual public servants, because there are lots of good ones. Ultimately, under Tynwald standing orders, we were in a sub judice situation according to Tynwald's standing
order. Okay, let's just deal with this one.
11.4.
Explain that one away to me, because you are more constrained than we are almost, aren't you, because being a member of
Inside
Tynwald.
Tynwald I am, so I'm talking to you now freely, and I've got to make up my own mind, and you've got to make up your own mind through broadcast to me about whether we're right, and I'll come through to what I understand the tribunal, but Tynwald's standing orders are slightly different. So essentially, as far as I can tell, inside the tribunal process, there are 3 stages still to go. Number 1, we're still in the period of an appeal. Number 2, we've still got to have the quantum hearing, who pays what is how I described it once before. And thirdly, we've got that issue about the alleged fabrication of documents and the inadequate disclosure and all of those
Which
things.
could bring more litigation, potentially, yes.
Yeah, so there's that. And then, but in terms of the Tynwald standing order, we've got a Tynwald standing order that hasn't changed for 14 years, and it does define sub judice for questions and now for statements as being anything until the appeals are finished, until all the action's finished. So therefore, I think I'm being a bit freer with you than I could have been in Tynwald Court. And what my questions would have been in Tynwald Court if I could have asked them, because the other thing that was going on was that Mr President didn't have his best day in my view, and he was squashing questions, including shortening question time when the bus driver, when a parallel issue in bus service was going to come up, was that the Nolan principles, I gave them before. Has a person holding a public office acted impartially, fairly? Have they told the truth? And have they basically acted according to all of the 7 Nolan principles? And that's the question that I think Minister Ashford, as an honourable person, will be asking himself, and that's the question that I hope the Chief Minister is asking himself as he thinks about his Council of Ministers in coming weeks. Because what's most important is we get rid, once and for all, of the bullying at work that's clearly going on. Nobody's denying it's going on in lots of parts of health and in social care, in parts of infrastructure, the bus service. It seems like it goes on in respect of scientists and people who have a professional opinion that doesn't suit the politicians of the day and the top civil servants. And I prefer having a series of opinions, a set of opinions, rather than one minister just hearing one person.
Is there corruption in the Isle of Man civil service / whatever you want to call it in government?
How you define corruption?
Well, because I in fact I had a few advocates and lawyers onto me saying that because I was very careful of that word and wasn't sure if it's right, but apparently it holds up what we're trying to talk about here. That things certainly have been. Again, I don't know how much we can say, but
as I was coming to the Isle of Man 20 years ago, there was talk, because a QC said it, of the concept of institutional corruption. Okay, and that was in the context of planning.
Corruption.
That was in the context of planning and Mount Murray, and it was people having undue pressure put on them and people not being treated fairly. And if a QC was prepared to say that, and then it was all through Tynwald for a number of years, that's a precedent for one use of that very nasty C word. So what does that mean? It just means that the system needs looking at, and we are in that place. And that's why I appeal to Minister Ashford, Chief Minister, to basically think about whether or not the Isle of Man political system, public service system, would be better off with a change in council ministers. Then there comes obvious questions about, what next. And clearly, what next matters is the national interest and public policy, and that's what I care about mostly.
Yeah, but okay, let's just have a recap of what happened in Tynwald in that sense of what was being said. I mean, I think Claire Christian was pushing the boundaries. She got shut down, but at least she came out with some questions which I thought others could have done. Do you not think there could be more grouping together the black backbenchers maybe to have this sorted?
I think on Friday I thought I'd probably be alone. I think my radio interview had quite an impact. I think there was quite a lot of lobbying of members, and I think even some people who naturally would always be on the side of a report and an investigation were thinking to themselves, perhaps Chris Thomas had a point on the radio. To be fair, David Ashford is a very good, very nice human being, and he was very kind to me all day, even though I'd made this up. I thought he was very reasonable in some of his responses in the debate. I don't think he's in his highest place at the moment, and so I do hope that there's reflection all around. And genuinely, we've got massive issues in healthcare. That matters for you, it matters for me.
Sure.
We've got massive issues in terms of respecting scientists. We've got massive issues in getting people to come and work in our island from across, because of all the reputational damage that we've had and potentially could have amplified. So we've really got to take this seriously. Now let's move on to what the Chief Minister said. Basically, I probably put it in too provocative a way, but essentially he said that lots of things that have needed to be done in the past, and I've said needed to be done in the past, and in fact the last government programme was supposed to be doing them, but they all petered out, were now going to be done. And I got interviewed straight after that, and what I said was it sounded to me like many people would hear it as all talk and plans and nobody was going to be accountable, if that's the word you want me to use, but basically it just sounded like what other people have said. You like me are friends with Mrs. Barber. You'll remember that back 3 years ago, I think 4 years ago even, Minister Ashford, DHSC Minister at the time, made Mrs. Barber responsible for dealing with culture in healthcare. It's exactly the same words as the Chief Minister used now, 3 or 4 years on. The problems are no different, they're just worse. We've got to fix those problems, and I do think it would be good for Minister Ashford to offer his resignation, for the Chief Minister to accept it and put in place a new Treasury Minister.
Let's talk about the Chief Minister. I mean, I was expecting big things. I think everyone was getting ready. We heard things like the SAVE programme's coming back to try and reduce...
My eyes rolled at that point.
I think everyone's eyes rolled at that. But also this thing about the whistleblowers, which is, of course, that's been looked at. Julie Edge had her thing. All this seems, I don't know, he's missed the point, or has he not missed the point? I mean, should he not taken firmer action?
I think so. I think he should have taken firmer action. I mean, SAVE petered out. SAVE is probably the least successful initiative of the last government. And
now the government's bigger than ever.
So. Now the government, exactly. And originally it was targeted as saving 25 million. Then a year later it was down to 15 million. And at the end it petered out because some of those savings were from a public defender unit, which was never going to go any place. Is that what they're going to bring back? We've got the bus service. We had the airport being.
But this is deflection, wasn't it? I mean, this
exactly that. What occurred to me was this was Boris Johnson type deflection tactics, and
this was his moment to really step up. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not trying to make too much commentary, and I will have my time to do that when I'm being talking to other people. But it didn't happen, did it? I mean, in your view, he didn't.
It didn't happen yet.
You think he can still do it then?
Yeah, I think he can still do it because basically you got to remember. I proposed Mr. Cannan to be Chief Minister in 2016. He went with somebody else this last time, and it was successful this time. Perhaps he had that in his mind too much when he was putting together his government programme and his ministers. Yeah. Basically, we're friends. He was obviously angry that I offered him what I called an olive branch, and basically said that what he was doing was what his council ministers in the last administration has stomped on, squashed back in 2020 when I was fired, and we talked about it in a very windy car park. I remember near the gas-fired power station. Right. But essentially, I still think that the Chief Minister can do it, but he needs to do more. Yes.
So he's got to make some sackings now, has he? And I'm using plural because there are other people that should maybe also look at their positions, right?
Yeah, and now we're getting into what sub judice. I mean, we can't comment on, and Minister Ashford's right. Operational HR matters are not for politicians as such, but what matters for us is politics, and the politics of all of this is just if we're not seen to acknowledge how serious this issue is, the public won't forgive us, and the trust in the Manx government will go down even further, and it's already rock bottom.
Rock bottom. Mm-hmm. And this is playing out now much outside the Isle of Man. I mean, I know there's websites for doctors and those sort of things who have been really following this one very closely. What sort of ramifications could it have if things are not seen to be sorted?
We've had in our healthcare system, we've had commuting people into our hospital for a number of years, and this is not going to help reduce that. So we're paying a fortune because we've got people under agency contracts and bank contracts. Likewise in other parts of the public service. Likewise in things. Essentially, we've really got to. I'd say we're in a situation like the 1980s, and at that point, people like Sir Miles Walker stepped up, and they genuinely built bridges with people, and that's what we need to do now. We had 34 years of growth or whatever it was. We had the good times. It was easy. It's now harder in the world. We've got an exciting young set of council ministers. Just remember, 2 of them had never been MHKs before they became senior ministers. 5 of the ministers got in 2016, and only Tim Crookall and Alf Cannan have been in there longer than 2016. I felt guilty as hell over the last 6 or 7 months. Should I have been in there? Whatever. But I took the view that policy matters. My manifesto, I forgot to bring the copy to show you and so on, but policy matters for me. I could see something was going to happen, and I wanted to protect the national interest by staying out of the government, but essentially the most important thing is the national interest, and that is be above David Ashford's personality and his pride.
Well, I know you saw the interview on this network for the one with Chris Robert Shaw, and he named names about people. And it wasn't. I straight to the point that it wasn't just Mr. Ashford that he mentioned, because Laurie Hooper's come into this mix as well.
Yeah.
What he knew, what he didn't know, and when he was on the committee that was listening to the thing, then went and gave evidence that said he wasn't quite sure what was going on.
And it wasn't only Minister Hooper. There were two other ministers who were also on the same committee.
So how far?
Minister Edge and Minister Paul Wilson, and then Joan Watterson as Speaker was also on that committee. So I mentioned that as in one of my questions yesterday. Where is the Public Services Commission in this? I used to chair that. One of the things I worry most about the government is what's going to happen to public servants. I care about public service, and I care about public servants as a consequence, because they deliver public service. And where was the Public Services Commission in all of this? What happened after I got dismissed and as chair the day after I was sacked as a minister? So there are series.
What did you know when you were in Coman, though? I mean, you were
It wasn't right. It wasn't right.
Okay.
It wasn't right. Essentially, it was obvious on the 16th of March that we were getting information from only one source, and
did you flag it?
Very much.
Did
so.
you know that was?
I left Council Ministers on Monday, the 16th of
But did
March.
you know much about what was going on behind the scenes?
I knew that there were squabbles going on all of the time. Yeah,
and the only source of information was. It appears from one particular source.
Well, not quite, because in the Council of Ministers we had the DHSC chair coming in, we had the Chief Secretary, we had the Chief Financial Officer, we had the Attorney
medical
General.
information was only coming from one source.
Yeah, that's right, and that wasn't right.
And that seemed to be the wrong.
Yeah, and I remember, I just remember some particular frustrations of mine. So, there's either RO, which isn't RO. Do you remember all the talk of RO at the time? It's actually R0, because it means R at the time 0, and then it becomes R1.
The R rate.
I used to have a bit of a banter with Mrs. Magson, because she couldn't understand what I was talking about. I've got to say, and I was frustrated by the modelling approach which came up. I was frustrated by misunderstanding of shielding, self-isolation, quarantine, and all of those sorts of things. I probably wasn't a very pleasant person to work with in March, April. I was sidelined. I was the only person not to.
You were sidelined.
Well, I was. I never appeared on the
big podium moment.
I never. I was taken off all the national strategy groups and the economic recovery groups, and I think it's because my personality was challenging.
Bullied?
You can't bully a politician. We're all, we're all thick-skinned, and we've all got multi-mitty tendencies.
But the culture, was it there that you were being sidelined because they didn't like to hear what you wanted to say? Then?
Yeah, I did. It wasn't Howard Quayle, particularly, who got rid of me. He was the instrument of things. I think probably I was challenging the top civil servants a bit too much.
And you've made that vote, which immediately you have to, by your own terms and conditions, have to go.
No, well, if I was right, no, and it wasn't subject to collective responsibility. There's no point going back. Okay. I mean, essentially, what we had at the time was we had 3 or 4 politicians who all fancied themselves as Winston Churchill, rising with the oratory for the moment. But I kept in my mind that it was Clement Attlee who won the election straight after the war. When you're having a national crisis, which is what we have now, all sorts of external contributors, cost of living, post-COVID, the war and the impact on the economy, you really do need to gather together. But it's not at certain moments there's the communicators, and then at other moments there's the men in grey suits who know it's important to develop radar and to bring in Beveridge and all those people to develop the welfare state. And I'm that sort of politician, and I'm very pleased to contribute in the future. And that's what we need now. We need national government to try and rebuild confidence, and the good start
because
for that. Minister
you just said this is a national crisis.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's massive to say that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is how deep this is going now, to try and bring the Isle of Man back to having a good international relations with people.
I didn't say that we have a bad. I didn't say we have a bad reputation as yet.
Well, it's not playing well, is it? Let's face it.
I didn't say, and it's not. And national crises have got all sorts of. There's a whole spectrum of them. It's not particularly bad.
Oh, okay.
It's not
sorry, if I over-egged that, I'm sorry.
But we are in a moment of reflection, and we've got to do the right thing. Yeah. And the right thing is actually not just picking up the pace and that sort of stuff as you hear, and being optimistic and smiling and confident. It's of actually recognising and acknowledging that we do have fundamental problems and addressing them properly, and that we have a public finance issue, we have an issue in our healthcare service, we have an issue in our public service, and all those things. Lots of good things on the island. It's a wonderful place to live, and we
absolutely. But this is something that is so gobsmacking, jaw-dropping. You use these terminologies, and it has to be fixed. Can I quickly ask you though about the actual tribunal, when it came out? What was your reaction when you actually read? I presume you read all 200 pages of it. What was your reaction?
Well, I was there the day.
I know you were there most of the time. Yeah.
I was there some of the time, and so it wasn't. I was trying to work out in my head what issues Mr. Stewart and his colleagues would write up in their 200 pages, and it was a very long document, well written, still subject to appeal, and essentially, I was just so disappointed that we got to the state where there was all of those issues that were reported and so on. So I'm trying to avoid getting any call from lawyers about contempt of the tribunal process or anything like that. But there's still important stages to go on in that process. So what I've tried to limit myself are the political issues, and what politicians are there for are to make sure that we step up to the plate when we have a national situation, if we're going to call it that.
Crisis. Just to make it clear before we finish then, how many people do you think have to go? I mean, I'm not asking names now. I'm thinking how many people, positions, whatever you want to call it. How many?
I'm not even going to get.
You're not even going to go that far.
I'm not even going to go that far. What I'm going to say again is the two most important things are dealing with the fairness at work issue. The second one is protected disclosures, and I guess there is a third one. The third one is a new type of politics where we focus on public policy, and I can see signs in some of the ministers already that they're going back to the old days that led to the type of Mount Murray type situation, which was another national crisis we had that we got over. Yeah.
When do you think we'll have this sorted? I mean, I've never got these different procedures still to go through and all that sort of thing, but do you see a new broom having to sweep up this whole mess?
Well, I've what's the phrase? I've nailed my colours to the door. Is that what you do? Is that
to the mast? Yeah.
I've nailed my colours to the mast, so I'm tarnished with that. To be fair, David was very respectful and friendly yesterday, Minister Ashford. Likewise from my side. The great thing about Manx politics is it's not personal. You can be as nasty as possible to somebody in Manx public, and they'll see, and the other side will see. We're slightly held up by the fact that we have so few of us, so we can very easily end up.
Let me try this one more time differently then. When all these different hurdles are out of the way and there's no sub judice being threatened by anybody, will you be constantly reminding in question time or whatever, should this person have that job, should you not resign? Will it be something you will keep going at, or do you think we will just park this and move on?
The media will, and I will be accused of it every time I make a challenge to government policy. Now I've nailed my colours to the mast. So already I don't think you could stay for the debates on the Treasury and on the enterprise plans. But I had 10 points of things that were wrong with the Treasury plan, and I laid them out. And in the future they will come back at me to say that I'm just standing a corner. To me, would be much better off to refresh, to reset, and to set off again in the right direction. And that will take some humble pie by quite a few people, me included, because the island plan isn't good enough as yet, and the election in that sense wasn't completely successful, even if it was a failure.
So we wait for the Chief Minister to now really get his, I'm going to be careful what words I use here, but I was going to say get his act together, but that he's doing what he's doing, and that he's doing what he thinks right. But in your view, he needs to do more, right?
Yeah, and I'm probably completely wrong, and it'll all peter out in 2 or 3 days. But to me, it's more serious than that.
I don't think it will. I think the media is probably going to be the only people who can keep this sort of up. And
yeah.
What do you think?
But an appeal to the media, an appeal to my political colleagues. It's not you, it's not me. It's the national interest that matters. We need the best public service, because we do have. You're going to push me again to say national crisis again. But to me, if we have a healthcare crisis, if we have a crisis in getting people to come in to work in the public service, if we have a population that's the same as it was 10 years ago, if we have a population that's aged compared to what it was 10 years ago, if we have people who can no longer afford to take mortgages on to buy houses, we do have all of the and we have people who are struggling with 2, 3, 4 jobs just to meet the cost of living. We have a climate change issue. We have a war that's going on that's making the world economy less opportune for exporting into, and that's what we rely on. We really do have a national problem, and it could easily become a crisis if it's not already.